Welcome to the Learner Centered Collaborative Podcast. I'm your host, Katie Martin, and so thrilled to invite you to my conversation with Stephanie Buelow, one of my dearest friends and amazing educator. Dr. Stephanie Buelow is an associate professor of literacy education at the University of Hawaii at Manoa in the School for Teacher Education. Her current work is focused on teacher preparation and literacy leadership. Stephanie is the 2018 recipient of the University of Hawaii's Board of Regents Medal for Excellence in Teaching. No surprise, she's amazing. Her research interests lie in disciplinary literacies, new literacies, and teacher learning and development. Stephanie draws on 12 years of elementary teaching experience in culturally, linguistically, and socioeconomically diverse schools to ground her current work as a teacher educator. In addition to a classroom teaching experience, Steph was a literacy coach, Title I coordinator, technology specialist, district literacy level resource teacher, and all have offered her opportunities to work with administrators and teachers from diverse K-12 settings. Steph is also a mom to two amazing teenage boys and the wife of a high school science teacher. Welcome, Steph. I'm so glad that you're here.
Thanks for having me, Katie. Glad to be here.
All right, we got to start off with the question I always ask. What are some of the key experiences that have shaped you to be the educator that you are today?
Well, I think all the experiences, right? From being a student to being an elementary teacher to being a teacher educator, but to also being a parent. And I think that the experiences include the good, the bad, the challenges, the successes. All of those things together really help me think about who I am today and what I believe education should be. So I do have a couple key moments, though, that I was thinking about. And one of them had to do with, I think it was around my 5th year teaching. I finally made the connection to what it meant to really put my philosophy of teaching in action. And it took a while, right? I feel like the first few years of teaching, I was just getting by, right? And I think I had success here and there. I know I had challenges, but I think I was more just doing, and I wasn't really reflecting on why I was doing it or how I could do it better, because I was really just in survival mode, like many new teachers are. The moment came when I asked a question. This was, I asked a question to the class, and I had silence, right? And so I said, talk at your table first. And not saying that I never did table talk before or turn and talk before, but it was in that moment that the room just started buzzing, right? And students were talking, and then we brought it back, and volunteers were speaking, and the discussion just was so lively. And I think at that moment, it really clicked with me about learning is social, right? That social learning theory that I believe in, that students need opportunities to have conversations and dialogue around ideas, and how those conversations really help to shape their thoughts and their thinking. There was another moment that I was thinking about that really shaped who I am today, and it was when students wanted, I wanted to try something new with students, but I didn't know exactly. This was like years ago, so this is going to date me. I think it had to do with like a podcast or incorporating a video. There was something, it was technology based. This was many years ago, and I didn't exactly know how to do it. But the students kept saying, well, I can show you, I can do this, and I thought at that moment, like, okay, let them show me how to do it. And at that moment, I let go.
Will you talk a little bit about your dissertation and what you were studying and what you learned with your students that year?
Yeah, I was thinking about that. It was a long time ago. It feels like a life ago. I think some of it goes back to the first question when you said some of those moments that really shaped me. Those moments really came that year, and I think that it wasn't because those things were new practices, but they were the first time that I was slowing down and really reflecting on what I was doing. I was really taking the time to make sense of it. So I went back to the classroom after being a literacy coach, and after being in 6th grade a couple years, I began working through my dissertation research and collecting data. And so I engaged in critical participatory action research, where my students became co-researchers, so to say, with me. my main focus was looking at how to integrate popular culture, their interest, right? What were they thriving on outside of school, bringing in their funds of knowledge and everything that makes them who they are outside of school, and finding ways to bring it within the curriculum. I initially thought I would start, my first thoughts were I was just going to focus on music. And then I quickly realized that I had a student that said, like, I don't listen to music. I love video games. So it quickly changed because I thought if I'm truly going to honor who my students are and I'm truly going to go down this journey with them, and if I'm going to ask them but not honor it, then what's the point of asking?
Right.
So it just really turned into a year-long project of, I'm sure they learned, but I learned a lot. I spent a lot of time talking with them, interviewing, asking them questions about, and putting things on them. Like if they would talk about video games that they enjoyed playing, I would say, let's think about what we could do in class with that. Like, how can we use video games as a way to learn something that we're reading about in a novel, right? So they would come up with ideas and we would brainstorm together and then, fine tune it. And so, for example, we came up with the idea of after they're done with the literature circles, one of the ways that they could demonstrate learning is if they wanted, they could create a video game to match the novel, to show their comprehension and understanding of the novel. That was just one example, but I learned a lot about myself during that time. I think, again, going back to how I responded initially was I learned how to really be aware and conscious of what my theory and philosophy of learning was and how it was being put into practice, not just mindlessly going through things, but being really thoughtful about it. Part of that came through reflection. I initially thought I would keep a researcher's log, which I did keep a researcher's log, but it wasn't written because I found that I didn't have time for that. So I would, this was, again, before cell phones could record your voice, but I would talk into a voice recorder on my drive home every day and just reflect, just talk to myself about how the day went and, really go through all that process. Going back and listening to that was really insightful. I think I learned to really center my practice around my students, who they were, how I could serve them best, what were their interests, what were their needs, and then really not get as caught up on pushing through a curriculum, but really focusing on the learner and supporting them, making sure that they were getting what they need. We were still definitely addressing standards. It was rigorous work, but it was very centered on them. I learned, yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, I love that. And I think that what you just made sure to mention, because a lot of people think like, oh, it's just a free for all and you do whatever you want. And, the kids just are doing fun projects, but you were really intentional. You knew the standards, you knew the level of complexity that you needed to get them to. And I think that deep knowledge of what you were trying to get students to know and be able to do, combined with their own interests and skill sets, really is the powerful match, right? Instead of, like you said, just going through the curriculum because that's what you're supposed to do, being mindlessly going through it, being really intentional about how those things connected and what students were learning along the way.
Absolutely. And, yes, we had a lot of fun. We did a lot of unconventional things, but there was some direct, explicit instruction because they needed it for certain skills. I think the difference is those skills that they needed, or the skills that did come through some explicit instruction, always had a larger context to it. Why are we doing this? There was an authentic application of it. We weren't just doing it for the sake of skill and drill practice. Something that came out of it, and I didn't initially plan on looking at this, and I went back and I listened. It was funny because right around this time of the standardized test, the state assessments that were happening, I talked a lot in my researcher's journal, my talking to myself on the drive home, about fears that I had that they were not going to do well because I didn't spend time doing test prep. I didn't spend the time. I did address the test as a genre, just like we approached any other genre, like the format and the layout and what to expect. But we didn't overemphasize it, right? We didn't let that take away from the authentic learning that they were already engaged in and what they were doing critiquing text, reading text, comprehending text, producing text, making sense of the world. That still forefronted it. But the closer I got to that, maybe it was March or April, whenever we were taking it, I was scared. I was nervous, right? Like, oh my gosh, am I going to fail them? Or they, because, the reality is even though I say I don't value the results of those assessments, my name was on it. And you do have a value placed in that. And I think that is reality for teachers. Anyway, I was terrified, right? What's going to happen? And when the results came out the following, whenever we got them, maybe August, they did amazing, outstanding. They actually, between their math, which my outstanding partner teacher, and their ELA scores improved dramatically. Like the scores went up maybe like from like the 40% passing to like 70 to 80% passing. The school won a blue ribbon that year because of such an increase in the scores. So I think from that, it was again, I didn't ever plan on standardized testing data, was never part of my data points because it just wasn't, right? But I couldn't ignore it because I think it spoke really loudly to the power when we center our practices around our students and we don't get so caught up in feeling like we're just pushing through programs and through curriculum.
I'm so glad you said that, because I was going to say it if you didn't. I wrote about it back in the day at Learner-Centered Innovation. And, I think it is such an important testament to what you just said. Of course, it's going to be part of how we're measured in schools. It's really not going to go away, but it doesn't have to be the only thing. And you, like many other educators, when you focus on kids, when you focus on getting them to do work that matters, when you also know that your content standards and objectives, I think it's a really great match. And we often see those same results, those authentic learning yields kids who are capable of doing well on assessment because they've been engaged in doing, like you said, reading, writing, creating texts. And so they feel very competent and able and have a lot of confidence when they go and take a test.
I think so. Yeah.
It's really cool. So kind of building off that, given what you learned and the work in your dissertation, I have a teacher just told me, like, well, I'm teaching To Kill a Mockingbird, right? I spend 6 weeks every year teaching the kids, maybe more, To Kill a Mockingbird because that's what we have to do. What is your advice, whether it's, early elementary, middle school, to teachers who feel like they have to teach a novel or they have to teach certain books rather than teaching kids the skills of reading and important literacy?
Yeah. Well, I think one thing I'll start by saying is I have an elementary background. And so the quote unquote teaching a novel isn't as much of the narrative that you see in elementary schools. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. It's just not as prevalent in an elementary setting as it is when you move into middle and high school. But I would say that it's one approach of many, right? It's one way we can think about reading instruction or literacy or helping our students think about producing and engaging with text. There's literature circles, there's many other ways to think about text, but I think I would kind of wonder why that approach, why that book, right? And I think that those are important questions to reflect on as an educator. Why am I doing this? And if the answer is it's because that's what we've always done, then that's a time for some critical reflection points, because just because it's the way we've always done it doesn't mean that it's best serving the students that are in front of you right now.
Right.
By the way, I love that novel. I think it's great. I love books, right? So it's not like I'm going to bash the book or bash a novel, but I think another thing to think about is if we really reflect on Rudine Sims Bishop's metaphor of classroom libraries needing to reflect windows, mirrors, and sliding doors. They need to reflect our students' lived experiences, who our students are. That idea of the mirror, they should be able to see themselves in the characters of their books. Yet they should also have windows, right? Which is giving them perspectives into lives and experiences that are different than theirs. So I think I would just really want to have some conversations with teachers that could be perhaps doing the novel studies. Not that it's wrong. I think just engaging them with why, what's your purpose? Does this approach suit your students best? Is this a novel that's providing windows and mirrors and sliding doors for your students? What other texts are being brought in to complement the themes that they may be encountering? And then rather than teaching the novel, what explicit reading, especially if we're thinking about elementary through middle school students, young adolescents who are still developing strategies for, their skills for comprehension and fluency and vocabulary, what type of instruction is being paired with this, right? Granted, if we were to take the theme of the book or the content of the book, there's a lot to learn from that, right? Historically, I think, there's a lot going on in that novel that sheds a lot of light, that's building a lot of background for students. But if we take it from a literacy perspective, what are they taking away from that in terms of their reading and writing skills?
I love so many things that you just said, and I'm trying to like piece it together, but the questions really just being reflective of like, why am I teaching this, and what's the impact on students, and are they really developing the skills that I need them to develop, are really important. And you're right, you may be able to do it through a novel, but it might require different pedagogy. It might require some different bringing in different texts. But my more cynical middle school background is that too often I've seen it just be, let me read it to you. The kids aren't engaging. And that's frustrating for me, because when kids aren't actually engaging with text and they're not reading and they're not writing, they're just being drug along. And then we see them not really developing the skills that they need, nor the confidence or interest and love of literacy. And I just think it's important to be reflective, like you said, why am I doing this, and what's the impact, and what is there another way? Because there's so many great books and so many great stories that kids would really resonate with, that they don't often get a chance to read in school because of the teacher's perspective sometimes, or the way we've always done it.
Yeah, like what we privilege, what we, and to your point about the students not necessarily engaging with that text and being kind of drug along, I bring that back to the concept of if you're a runner, the best way to become a better runner, if you're going to run a marathon, you got to run daily. You got to have practice running. You have to build your stamina. And if we're thinking about developing readers, students that have identity as readers, and students who can comprehend and engage with text, then they need to be reading. I love read alouds. I'm a fan of a read aloud. I just read something that said like audiobook booming industry is evidence that we never outgrow read alouds. Like I listen to audiobooks all the time. I'm not saying that read alouds don't have a place. They have a place, but students also need opportunities to read themselves, right? They need to be reading with that text. And so if we're choosing text that's marginalizing and not representative of their interests and experiences, and they're not reading it, then are we really serving them?
No. that's a good question. And I do think that's the right question to ask. So that's kind of what you as a teacher teacher educator, teacher education gets a lot of criticism, right? Mm-hmm. Like a lot of people often will say, well, you're in spaces around public education and it's easy to point fingers. So you have people say, well, if we just fix teacher education, then all of this would be solved and all the teachers would come in knowing exactly what to do. So I have a 2-part question on this, is like, one, what are your thoughts on that? Because I know I went through an amazing teacher preparation program. I say this often, and it really set me up for success. And I know you, as an amazing educator, have a really great program. So what are your thoughts on the current status of teacher preparation, and like what's working, and maybe what are some ideas and ways that you're thinking we can better prepare educators for today?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the first piece to speak to is, like you mentioned, the finger pointing. I remember as an elementary teacher, not you, but some of our colleagues in the middle school would be like, well, if you taught them
Yeah.
this, they didn't, so we do love to point fingers. And I imagine this is maybe across other professions as well, right? But the high school teachers are blaming the middle school teachers. And so, that is perpetuated and it still happens. Another point to make is one of the things that I really came to realize pretty quickly when I transitioned into teacher preparation is we only have them for such a short time, right? We have them for 2 years. So when you think about a teacher's journey of where they are, like who you are today as an educator, who I am as an educator, um, my teacher prep program couldn't like produce me who I am today, right? I needed all the experiences that I've had to be where I am today. We learn from experience, right? That's really going to shape us. Now, that's not to say though that we don't lay the foundation, because that is exactly what we're doing. I think the expectation that we're producing, veteran teachers that are I think that that's an unreal expectation, but we are producing novice teachers that should have a strong foundation. When you think about the critiques of teacher prep, though, I think that if you bring it back to that research, when we think about classroom instruction, that more than the school, more than the program, more than the curriculum, the individual teacher matters the most. I think that transcends, right? It's that individual teacher educator that's going to have an impact, probably more than the program that they're within. I imagine there's that piece. And then there's the mentor teacher that they're working with. I think that that's critical because hopefully there's an alignment of philosophical approaches between the two, right? And that both are doing quote unquote best practices. And so that the teacher candidates are experiencing it from a theoretical and like from a student perspective, but then also having opportunities to see it with kids and then put on their teacher hat and like work through it with students. So if you were to think, I think this is not just my opinion, this is research that tells us like one of the key things that pre-service teachers need is they need those clinical experiences. They need them embedded within their program. They need them often. When I think to my own experiences, I didn't have them right away. I was just a student taking my classes. And then I had a couple field experiences like sprinkled in, and then I student taught. And where I really learned how to become a teacher was my first few years of teaching. Now, the program I'm in, I think the students are fortunate in that they have their methods courses a couple of days a week, and then they're out in the classrooms a few days a week so that they can have those experiences immediately.
But it's just like our students, right? Like, the K-12 students, you need to be able to learn something and apply it. And if there's no time, you were given the metaphor of being a runner, right? If there's no time to apply and try out these ideas, they just become stuck in your head, and you may or may not feel confident testing them out, and it doesn't become part of your practice until you do that.
Do it. Right. Exactly.
So you've developed a literacy clinic. Can you talk a little bit about kind of the literacy clinic, how it works, and what you're learning from it?
Yeah. So going back to that concept we just said, that they need that opportunity to put it into practice, right? Like I believe we're going to learn best by doing. And I think I'm fortunate to be part of a great program. I have amazing colleagues, and I think we're all doing outstanding work, and there's a lot of passion in it. But I also two things. One is I love doing new things. I love trying new things and kind of pushing myself to innovate. And maybe it's not a new innovation in the field, right? But it's a new innovation for me, for myself. I began to really think about how the student teachers, or the teacher candidates is what we call them before they advance on to student teaching. They're taking these methods courses. So they take a reading methods course and a writing methods course. And they're usually on different semesters. I started to think about how, like, for example, when you're taking the reading course in the third semester of your program, and you're in field 2 days a week, but you're in one classroom for the whole semester. So let's say you're placed in fifth grade. Well, then we can talk about it in class, and you can engage in the activities, and you can read about it, and you can experience early literacy like phonemic awareness and alphabetic principle and phonics. But the chances of you seeing that in practice are pretty low. Now, I'm not saying that they're non-existent, but they're pretty low. The chances of you teaching a lesson that's related to that or working with students around those concepts are also pretty low. And so I wanted to create an environment where the teacher candidates could experience all aspects of literacy instruction. So I was fortunate enough to get some support from the university. I did some redesigning of curriculum, and then I just recently completed a pilot. And so I designed a 3-semester literacy clinic. It's a scaffolded approach. So the first semester, the teacher candidates come into our program, and they usually take like an intro to teaching course. So typically I would teach that course and then the field. And then the next semester I would teach the writing in the field and then the reading in the field. So I redesigned that course, and I say I hijacked it to make it a literacy course. It still met the course objectives, which are like intro to teaching. It's like a mixed bag of elementary education, right? Like how to plan a lesson, like classroom management, all those things. I took the how to plan a lesson piece and integrated literacy instruction. So like reading comprehension. So the students were learning how to write a lesson plan. I supported them one-on-one individual conferences to support them in writing a lesson that was focused on a specific literacy strategy, like generic literacy strategies, right? Like a Tea Party or a KWL, just basic, like engaging people with around text. So they would write a lesson plan, they would deliver a lesson to their classmates, and then those resources went into a bank that the teacher candidates, then would go out into the literacy clinic, and they could choose whatever they wanted with their group and try them out. So that semester, we worked with like 3rd through 5th grade-ish students, right? I purposely, like if you were placed in 5th grade in the field, then you would work with 3rd grade in the clinic. And if you were in kindergarten in the field, you might work with 4th grade in the clinic. So you were purposely with a group of kids different in age than what you were experiencing in field. And so that same concept went through over the 3 semesters, with the difference of a gradual release of responsibility from me to them, right? So by the end, the teacher candidates were more in charge of the planning. The teacher candidates at the end, and sorry, I should backtrack and say, like, I grouped the students at first, I made some instructional decisions. By the end, the teacher candidates gave an assessment. We brought the assessment data to class. We put it out for all 60 students, made sense of it. They had to determine the groups. And then from there, they knew the direction for their instruction. And they were they had more autonomy towards the end, right? So that, again, they were experiencing something different in field because I purposely paired them with a separate grade level. But they immediately had class on Monday and then implement on Wednesday. So whatever they were learning in class, they had that opportunity to try it out. And it was a safe space where they could try it with, their small group of students.
So I think some pieces of this that are really critical for teacher education, but also transcend to their classrooms, teachers being able to have that clear instruction, that clear model. And, you talked about the experiences we have, how that shape us as educators. And this type of experience where they're getting to put these ideas into practice and influence young learners as readers, and being able to see their impact by like, oh, I tried this strategy and they grew as a reader. Those are things that I believe they will take with them throughout the rest of their journey as an educator and be much more empowered to try those strategies. Is that what you're finding?
Yes. I think that they were empowered in a lot of ways. One, I would say, is not even related. It wasn't something I necessarily was looking at, but classroom management. But they didn't have, so there was me, 15 of them, and like 60 kids. So of course I was there if something like went wrong, but for the most part, they had to work through the little kinks and bumps. They had to work work through how to maintain, that trusting community with their students. So there was a lot of growth in that. They would trial and error. Of course, at the end of the clinics, they would reflect and we would debrief and I could offer suggestions, but they had to work through it. I think in terms of their literacy instruction, one of the things we talked about is like, we're not going to use worksheets. We're not going to bring that in. You're welcome to teach skills, but I want you to do it in a creative way. So there's sidewalk chalk, paintbrushes, like be creative. Like I want you to have complete creative control to know what your students need, but how you're going to get them there without a script to read to help you. Now, I was a little nervous at first because I'm like, they might have needed a script to help them. And to help them get on their feet. But that's where that first semester, their lesson plans that they wrote, that they shared amongst themselves kind of became that. So, we never had any sort of pre-made curriculum, but they did support each other. They would, they over time would say, could we group together? I'm like, sure. If that's what you want to do, that's what you think is best for your students, work together, do part of your lesson together, separate. So, they really took ownership. By the third semester, it was their clinic. If they were absent because they were sick, they would write a lesson plan and share it with their peers and we would work through it. I think that it was their group, their students, they were fully in charge. And I was just there to guide them.
So we've talked about this model and I'm a huge fan of it. And, my dissertation work was on new teacher development and support. And so I always wonder, how might this model transcend teacher preparation and really move into those teachers' first year or two, or even more, as they're new teachers, they have their own classroom. What if there was a world where there was a experienced expert teacher like yourself who supervised and supported 4 or 5 novice teachers, or there was a mix of novice teachers and expert teachers who are working together to support a large group of students, rather than, well, I'm the expert teacher, here's my 20 kids, you're the novice teacher, here's your 20 kids. Is there a world that you could see, or ideas of how we could really move this model into our school day and help novice teachers really grow in their first couple years?
Yeah. I think creating collaborative spaces in an environment where collaboration is valued, and not just by saying it's valued, but creating the systems to put collaboration in place, right? So if it's something that we value from a leadership perspective, then how do we create systems for collaboration? Do we give them time to work together? Do we have physical spaces for them to bring their students together, where they can co-teach or learn from one another, and support one another? Perhaps it's like 40 students with 2 teachers and there's some fluidity amongst that, right? I think that used to be used at one time. There was models, I forget what they called it, but they would have that. And I know it still exists in places, right, where teachers can bring in their expertise in different areas. They may have like a home group of students that's theirs that for specific things, but amongst the teachers in that space, they're all bringing their expertise and they're all learning from one another. I definitely think that there's space for that, but we have to break down those barriers of like traditional, like 4 walls that contain 20 students with this teacher, even down to like bell schedules that dictate like certain content be learned at a certain time, when in the real world, that's not how learning occurs. It's very interdisciplinary, right? Like the reason why we learn to read and write is so that we can engage with text across all the disciplines and so forth, right? So I think we have to do some work on breaking down these traditional industrial style models that we've had so long in school.
Yeah. There's some great work out of ASU, the next generation workforce, and really thinking about those co-teaching models. And I think there's a lot of power in it, but I think it comes with what you said, not just we're co-teaching and you take the kids while I'm in the back of the class doing lesson plans and vice versa. It's really about working together, leveraging skills, small group, whole group, and being more fluid. And I think that also will allow for flexibility for teachers to come out of the classroom. When you work as a team, you can come out and you can go visit other schools, to bring it back where we started. You can go and get professional development. You can coach one another instead of feeling like you have to be everything to everybody and you can't take a day off. You can't be sick, right? So I think those more fluid models would not only support learners and in having better instruction and develop teachers in their journey as an educator, but it would also be better for just the social emotional aspect of everyone getting what they need. So including the students, absolutely.
Students and the teachers, right?
Yes. Yeah, everybody would have much more, just like everybody would be able to be in the space and work together, which is like other work environments, right? Rather than having to be so siloed.
Yes. And it makes me think a little bit about, I don't remember if I read it or I watched it or it was a podcast, but they talked about Apple's model. Apple, their model with their employees is that the more that you've, I guess, I don't want to say proven yourself, but if you've been successful as an employee, the more autonomy you gain. Mm-hmm. Right. And how workers thrive with autonomy. And it made me think about how one of the big differences, I mean, there's lots of differences, right? But like in the work you do now and I do now versus when we were in the K-12 setting, is we were very dictated by time and bells. And so like, our schedules didn't allow for any autonomy in terms of like personal use of time, right? Versus now, yes, I have certain times that there's non-negotiables, but then other times I can get my job done how I need, where I need, when I need, and to create spaces for other things, right? Because I think that that's important. So how can we bring that concept of autonomy, which that's a huge one, not just with time, but like with how we're teaching, what we're teaching, trusting teachers, investing in teachers.
Yep. Absolutely. And supporting them, right, to work together. That autonomy comes with the collaboration, right? You don't go and be like, oh, I'm just going to do a project and work on my own. It's your interdependence with other people you work with. You have flexibility and you can work sometimes on your own, sometimes in groups, but it's the autonomy within the goals of a system, I think, is the important piece. And I would love to see that brought to more schools.
Yeah, me too.
All right, we're going to move to rapid fire. I could talk to you all day about these things. Here's the first question. What is one thing we should stop doing in education?
Okay, when I thought about this, I was thinking like how we teach skills without ever giving the authentic application for it. So like, let's stop with the grammar worksheets that end with just the grammar and they don't ever get translated into our writing. Or let's stop with those memorizing spelling words for tests that we don't ever actually look that they're translating into their writing or that they're making sense of those spelling patterns and so forth. So I would say, let's stop teaching skills in isolation and make sure that we give some authentic context for them. They're needed, necessary, but they belong within the bigger picture.
Great. What's one thing we should start doing?
I would say let's start investing more deeply in teachers and teacher learning. I think an investment in teachers is an investment in students because, and I don't mean just investing financially, I mean investing in their learning, in empowering them as professionals, because you said it in your TED Talk, whatever that was, that empowered teachers empower their students. Yes. So I think if those are our goals, if we want to create students that are empowered and that have a voice, that we have to have teachers that are empowered and that have a voice. So let's invest in teachers and their learning rather than investing in programs and so forth.
Yes. All right. What should we keep doing?
So when I first started teaching, you could there was a sprinkling of do whatever you want around math and science and the arts, right? Like if you can fit it in. Mm-hmm. And then NCLB came in and they just disappeared altogether. and it was like, we're focusing on reading and math and taking tests and passing tests, right?
Mhm.
And then it's been really nice since the early 2000s that I've noticed that the pendulum is shifting back. We're building in more opportunities for the arts, for design thinking, for, building knowledge around science and social studies and going through the design process. So I would say something we should keep doing is whole child education, and making sure that we're really fully thinking about the whole child in all aspects of learning.
Great. What are you focusing on learning right now? I know you're on your sabbatical. So what are you doing right now?
I've got a lot of projects. So I am working on a little grant to support some work with our Hawaii Writing Project. And I am doing some research and writing, analyzing data around the literacy clinic, and doing just different writing projects. So writing, researching, that's kind of my day
Great.
right now.
It's always great too that when you teach reading and writing that you actually do the reading and writing. What is one thing that many people might not know about you?
I wasn't a reader growing up. I didn't really like to read. I didn't really start reading. I didn't identify as a reader until after I graduated college, actually, and moved to Hawaii and would go to the beach and read a book there. Um, all through school, I only had obligation text. I don't remember ever like being in a classroom where there was any choice text, so I never had the opportunity to develop that identity, which I think brings us a little bit back to that novel conversation about why it's so important that we don't just privilege one text all the time.
Obligation text. I like that. That hits exactly what I was talking about. Like, it's not that it's a bad one, but when you make someone read it, it has a different connotation than when it's given as a choice.
Yeah.
Like that. Do you have a favorite quote or saying?
I do. Okay, so this one it's from Billy Graham, and perhaps he uses it in a biblical sense, but I really appreciate it because I think it really captures how important it is that we're struggling when we're learning, or that struggle of learning. And it says, "Mountaintops are for views and inspiration, but the fruit is grown in the valleys." So this is something, when I'm working with student teachers, if they're having a moment of struggle, we talk about how you're growing your fruit right now. And if life always is full of those views and inspiration, then perhaps you're not growing and learning. So to embrace it when you're growing fruit.
I love that. What are you grateful for right now? Besides sabbatical.
I was going to say, in a professional sense, I am incredibly thankful that I was afforded a sabbatical, that I have that opportunity. I'm having time for my own professional learning, for research, and for writing, and that's been a really welcome change in my work schedule. Normally students are always coming first when I'm in the regular semester with teaching and grading and responding and supporting, and that's priority, and it's hard to get to these other things. And I forgot how much I actually really enjoy those parts. I enjoy reading and writing and making sense of all that. So you said not to say it, but that's what I'm grateful for.
All right, fine. Don't want to, I just, you're rubbing it in. And so, all right. Last question. What's your hope for the future of education?
I hope that all students are able to have a meaningful experience in school, that they feel safe, part of a community, that they feel validated in their language and their culture, that they have access to high quality, caring teachers. And I hope that they all leave as productive members of society.
Love that. Well, Steph, I've been wanting to do this podcast with you for a long time. So now I'm grateful for your sabbatical that you could finally come on and join me. Appreciate you, love your work, and I hope we get to do more work together. But thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to get to chat with you in this space. I know we chat a lot informally all the time. So thank you. I appreciate it.